Okay, today we will be talking about a concept of irregular verbs. So, when we want to conjugate verbs in the present tense, remember that we always take off the ending, put a new ending back on, whether it's an AR, ER, or IR verb. In other chapters, you've learned boot verbs, stem changing verbs, or we apply a spelling change in the middle. For these verbs we're talking about today, they are regular verbs in all of the forms or most of the forms except the yo form. So when we want to change the verb, we need to recognize the yo form has its own separate spelling. And then the rest of the verb we conjugate how we normally would. So let's look at some of these as an example. So the first verb we're going to look at is dar. And dar means to give. There we go. To give. So normally when we take off the ending right, this AR would go away. So I'm just going to kind of delete it for you. And then we add our AR verb ending back on. We'll notice that there's not much here with our verb that we can work with. So when we look at dar, the yo form normally is O, but in the yo form for dar, our new spelling is going to be this, doi, and that would be I give. So that is the only one that has its own separate spelling. The to form, then we take off the AR endings, that goes away, and then we know our to form ending is as, right? So das would be you give. So no spelling change here that I need to think about. Just take off the ending, put the new one back on. The ella usted form ending is a, right? So da would be he gives or she gives. Nosotros, take off the ending, add amos, so we have damos, es, and dan. So with yo, it's not just the o ending, we have doi as I give. And then the rest of the verb, just use those as, amos, ice on endings. So for example, poner is an er verb, and we know that means to put or to place. So the yo form, if I took off this er ending here, so that needs to go away, uh, my verb in the yo form is going to be pongo. So notice I add that G there. Pongo would be I put or I place. And then the rest of the form, it's an er verb, so I'm just going to use my regular er endings. So pones, pone, ponemos, pones, and ponen. So take off the ending, add ace, amos, ace, n. No spelling changes except for the yo form. Same with salir, that means to leave or to go out. So the yo form is going to be salgo. So I leave or I go out. And then the rest of the form, take off the IR ending and add your regular IR endings. So we have sales, sale, salimos. Remember with IR verb, it switches up a little bit compared to an ER, nosotros. Salis and salen. Traer means to bring. So the yo form is going to be traigo. So notice it ends in go, and we also have a spelling change here. I added that I. And then the rest of the forms, though, just take off this er ending and add your new endings here. So we have traes, trae, traemos, traes, and traen. Okay, so now there's two more verbs though that we're going to look at. Decir, which means to say or to tell. Now, normally when we look at this verb, the other ones we've been paying attention to, it's just the yo form that has a separate spelling, right? However, decir is also a boot verb, a spelling change. So what we're actually going to need to pay attention to is the yo form has its own spelling, but then the rest of the forms, if we think back to our boot, I'm going to kind of highlight these boxes for you. Remember the boot, anything inside of the boot, we apply the spelling change. This is the same idea, except the yo form will be slightly different. So I'm not going to highlight this. Normally we have our boot, all of these forms here, but the yo form is kind of separate. So I'm going to take that out of that boot here. So digo would be the yo form of I say or I tell. So now the to form, we need to take off the ending, put our regular IR ending, but notice it's also inside this boot, this shaded in box. So that means I need to make my spelling change where the E is going to change to I. So we have the dices, we say, and then nosotros is outside of the boot, no spelling change. Decimos, vosotros outside of the boot, no spelling change. And then back to our spelling change in the middle, dicen. So notice here, you will see that there is the E to I here. If you want to think of that as part of the boot, you can, but just kind of notice I kept it separate because the yo form is different. So it is irregular, has its own separate spelling. The other boot verb example we have in this one, venir, means to come. So the boot idea, the boot verb here is also going to apply in all the forms. I am leaving yo out of it though because yo is not going to change its spelling in the middle. It's going to be vengo. So if I said I come to the party, vengo a la fiesta. Now, if we're saying you come to the party, we have vienes. So E in this example changes to IE here. So we have viene, so it's inside of the boot. Nosotros then is outside of the boot, so venimos. Vosotros outside of the boot. And then vienen. We're back to our spelling change. So kind of just recognize with the yo form, you do have to kind of memorize the yo forms with its own spelling. You can follow the regular patterns for these verbs up at the top, but just recognize decir and venir also have some spelling changes in some of the boot forms here. Okay, let's just go through a couple of practice sentences with the verbs here, and then you can always check back with your answers on the slideshow presentation to make sure you're on the right track. So we want to say she feeds the dog. So dar is the verb that we need. If we notice it's not the yo form, so we can just use our regular AR ending. So ella le da de comer al perro. And le is just referring to the fact we're feeding the dog at the beginning. So da matches ella. She feeds the dog. Dos, yo, and then we have poner la mesa. So I set the table. So in this example, we need to make sure we use our new spelling change because poner is irregular in the yo form. So yo pongo la mesa. Seis, hacer. This is actually a verb you've learned in previous chapters. You may have forgotten it, but just know that hacer in the yo form is hago. So it also ends in go. So it's kind of like tango, vengo, pongo, and then we just use the rest of the verb in the regular er endings. So that's kind of why we see it's not included in this note sheet. But if you want to maybe circle this one or highlight it, just to remind yourself that hacer in the yo form is also its own spelling change. So if I said, I make the bed, hago la cama. So go ahead and do the rest and then check back with your answers and let me know if you have questions.